Reading that passage again. And the people spake against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no bread, neither was there any water, and our soul loatheth this light bread. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. And we could read this, and perhaps there are other passages in the Bible where the question would come to mind, why is God doing this? Why is God sending this serpent in to bite people that they'll die? Well, the answer is right before that. The people were not grateful for what God had given them. The people were complaining even against the manna that God had provided for them. Time and time again, when they would complain and say, we don't have food, we don't have water, God would bless them with it. Moses would intercede for the people, saying, God, be merciful to them. But they would complain against God and Moses. The Lord is just. And when those fiery serpents came in among the people, that bit the people, and much of the people of Israel died, it was the judgment of God. But the judgment of God had the desired effect. A lot of times people go out and they do something that they know is wrong, or they just living in sin, saying, I know this isn't right, but why is God bringing this against me? Because they're doing what they know isn't right. And then they want to blame God for the consequences against him. Instead of realizing, as the people of Israel did here, we need to get ourselves right with God. It says, therefore the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against thee. Pray unto the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. And Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said unto Moses, make thee a fiery serpent, and set it on a pole. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when it beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. He lived when he looked upon that serpent of brass that Moses had made and put on a pole. We're not told here where it was set among the camp of the Israelites, but it was probably there at the front of the tabernacle. There in the center of the camp, God had commanded that as the Israelites would move around from one location to another in the desert, in their wanderings, that when they would stop, they would set up the tabernacle first. After the tabernacle was set up, then 3 tribes would pitch their tents to the north, 3 on the west, 3 on the south, and 3 on the east. The 12 tribes of Israel encamped around the tabernacle of God there in the wilderness. The tabernacle of God being the center of the camp. It was very likely that this was the location that Moses had set that serpent on a pole, so that anybody who had been bitten by a serpent would know where to find it, know where to find deliverance, and they could come and look at it. And that's all it took. Just a look at the serpent of brass. Just a look at that serpent that had been set up on the pole, and God said if they just look at it, they'll live. They'll live. Seems so easy. Just look up. Look up. We get that perhaps image in our mind of somebody being very weak and just glancing up and seeing that promise that if you look upon the serpent of brass, you will live. But think about this. Israel wouldn't have fit in this room. There's a big parking lot back here behind us. The whole nation of Israel wouldn't have fit in that parking lot, as if I could just set the brass serpent out on this walkway here and that anybody in the parking lot could just, oh, look, there it is. They had to make an effort. You say, oh, it's so easy. It is. It's very easy. It doesn't require anything that we could do to affect our healing. It doesn't require anything that they could do, any home remedies that may or may not work. It worked for John. Let's see if it works for Bob. Let's see if it works for Sally, since it worked for Mary. One thing they knew would work, and it would be so easy to do it. So easy. And sometimes the thing that's so easy is what baffles and boggles the mind of so many people. Just like the leper, Nahum. There when he went to the prophet, said, I want to be cleansed. I've heard there's a God in Israel. I've heard there's a prophet of God in Israel. And he went to find him. He was a general. He was a commanding general in the Syrian army. A man of power, yet he was afflicted with this disease. He said, I want to be healed. And he went and talked to the prophet, or he went to find the prophet. The prophet sent his servant out. Didn't even go to meet him himself. He said, go and tell him, go dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times, and when you come up the 7th time, you'll be cleansed. Naaman was mad. He's like, what? He didn't even come out to see me himself? And what? He tells me something so ludicrously simple to go dip myself in that dirty river. And that was his complaint. He said, the Jordan River is filthy, full of mud. Why would I go dip myself in the Jordan River if I can go and dip myself in one of the cleaner rivers up back home? Sometimes it's so simple that it turns people away. I wonder how many people there were in Israel that said, what? What? I got to get out of my tent. I got to go wander my way through the other tents of my neighbors, get to the tabernacle, look at that pole. What? That doesn't make any sense. I got somebody here that's taking care of me. They've treated snake bites before. They know what they're doing. I'm going to stay here and let them treat me. Wouldn't be long. They'd be anguishing in pain and then pass away. Because God didn't say use the tried and true methods. God didn't say use the superstition. God didn't say use the old remedies. God said do what I said. And the prophet told Naaman, go and dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times. And when you come up, you'll be cleansed. And he got mad. He said it's too easy. It's too easy. And then Naaman's servant said to him, yeah, it's easy. So why not do it? What do you got to lose? And he said, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess you're right. I don't have anything to lose. Let's go to the Jordan River and see what happens when we do it God's way. And he was surprised. He said when he came up out of that river the 7th time that his flesh was new like a baby's skin. My goodness, sometimes it's shocking that when we do things God's way and God says He'll bless us when we do it, that we get blessed when we do things God's way. And we say, my goodness, look what the Lord has done. And we can rejoice in it. It was so easy. I didn't have to do what I thought would work myself. I didn't have to put all of my own efforts into making it happen myself. God did it for me when I simply obeyed. When I simply obeyed. What has God told you to do that you say that's just so easy? It's so easy just to say, hey, I'm going to pray for you, to a friend or a neighbor. It's so easy to say, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm a Christian. Sometimes people will say, I'm not going to do that. And whoever's offering them will just shrug it off. God says, let them know why. I'm not going to do that because I'm a Christian. What? What? It's so easy to say because I'm a Christian, and yet we fear what may happen when we say it. I'm not going to do that because I'm a Christian. What? You're crazy. You religious nut. We fear what may happen. What? You're a Christian, you holy roller? But maybe God wants us to tell Him so simply, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. 4 syllables. So easy to say. Maybe God wants us to make that easy step to be a witness for them because He's already been dealing with their heart and they say, I've got some things I need to get right with God. You'd be surprised when God deals with your heart to just make a simple statement to a person. It's because He's already been working in them. And maybe there will be some that call you a religious nut. Doesn't mean God hasn't been working with them already. Just means that they've been hardening their hearts against God, but God still wants to give them a witness. And it's so easy to be obedient to God. Why would we withhold? It's so easy, and yet there's so much that we don't know and don't expect about it. We don't know how that person's going to respond. It's so easy, and yet it takes that exercise of will to force ourselves past our fear, just as it would take the exercise of getting up out of your bed and walking towards wherever the tabernacle was. Maybe somebody lived close by. Maybe somebody lived on the far end of camp. Mighty nation of Israel camped there in the wilderness would have filled up more than that parking lot, would have filled up more than a lot of parking lots around here, would have filled up part of this city. It wasn't just that they would look out their window and say, oh, there's that serpent, and I'm better. But they had to get up and go to the tabernacle if that's where it was. They had to get up and go to the location where Moses had said it. Just like that man that was carried on his bed. That man who was paralyzed, he was lame. And they knew that Jesus was in a certain place. And they knew that Jesus was a healer, is a healer. And he said, I'm not going to let anything stop me from getting to God. And he found some friends, or rather they found him. He probably wasn't able to get up and look around, but as they would come by to check on him, maybe he said, hey buddy, I want to go and see Jesus. Go and get a few more guys that can carry me over there to see Jesus. Or maybe it was his friends that were encouraging him, but nevertheless, they picked up his bed, carried him to the house where they knew that Jesus was. And they said, there's no way we can get in, it's packed. They didn't say, well, I guess just wait until next time. They didn't say, well, I guess it's not meant to be. And that's something else that a lot of people will say. It's just not meant to be. It's just not meant to be. I intended to do something faithfully for God, but there's a little bit of resistance. I'll look like a fool to the people that look like they're serving God. How many people in that house were Pharisees that the Lord was rebuking, and how many were there because they had a genuine heart to receive something from God? We don't know the division. We don't know how many the numbers were, but we know that the house was full. And he didn't say, I'm just going to give up. But he said, we're going to do this no matter what. And they took him up on the rooftop. Said, we're getting in that house one way or another. They moved those tiles aside. And they lowered him in front of Jesus' feet. The Bible says Jesus saw his faith. Jesus saw that man's faith. He was probably the one encouraging his friends, don't take me home. Don't take me home. I'm not going home unless I'm walking home. And they lowered him through the ceiling. And Jesus, the Bible says they saw that Jesus saw his faith and told him, thy sins be forgiven thee. Thy sins be forgiven thee. And we know that there were some hypocrites in that audience that day because they began to speak hypocritically. They began to speak critically of Jesus and said, who can forgive sins but God alone? Jesus said, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. It's so easy to say this. But what's easier? To say thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say rise up and walk? And so Jesus turned around and said to him, rise up and walk. Show them that your faith in me is more than just about hearing words, but it's about what you're going to do with what I say. Show them that when I tell you that your sins are forgiven, that you're going to stand up and walk a different way. Show them that it's so easy to receive when you make that little effort to get there. Show them that it's so easy to obey when you know the truth of whom you're following. Show them. The Bible says Jesus saw his faith. I asked the question to the youth group in Washington one time. I said, what did Jesus see? And they all answered, he saw their faith. They all answered. So easy to answer. And I said, yeah, but what did he see? And they were struck and confused as to why I'd ask again. And a few of them ventured to guess again. He saw their faith. Yes, Jesus saw his faith. When we say, oh, I see, we mean to say, I understand. But what did Jesus, with his own physical human eyes, the same as you and I have, what did he see? And there was a pause, kind of like there's a pause now. And I said, he probably saw some dust falling from the ceiling. And then a shaft of light coming in before him. And he probably looked up at that moment and saw this guy coming in on a stretcher, let down by the four corners by his friends, and then a man laying right in front of him that didn't come in at the door. Jesus saw what he did because of his faith. What does Jesus see we do because of our faith? Do we do what's so easy? What's so easy? God says obey. The Bible says his commandments are not grievous. He's not trying to get over on us. He's already given us all that we need to fulfill those commandments. And he said, if you love me, keep my commandments. When you love somebody, it's easy to do something for them, even if it costs you something. And you say, it's so easy. Why? Why would you? I know somebody that gave an organ to another person, and they say, why would you do that? Because I love them. It's not an easy thing to go through. Perhaps the recovery process would be difficult, but it's an easy decision to make. When they saw that brass serpent, or when they were told of that brass serpent set on a pole that they must go see, it's an easy decision to make. It might take effort. If they've already been bitten by that serpent, and perhaps that poison is working their way in the bodies so that the joints begin to hurt, and with every step it's agonizing pain, but they make their way because it's an easy decision. God said it'll work. I'm going to take him at his word. Looking up. It's so easy. But looking up means that we look beyond the way we've already done it. The way we've already tried, the way we've gotten comfortable with. I'm comfortable going to church on Sundays and Thursdays and Tuesdays. I'm comfortable doing that. I'm comfortable praying. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable. People get comfortable even as they extend their realm of faith, you could say, into giving. I'm comfortable with that. I've gotten used to it. They get in a comfort zone. Doing good things. It's wonderful. They're doing right. But when a trial comes their way, and they said everything that I've been doing that's been making me comfortable isn't going to get me out of this, what do I need to do, God? What do I need to do, God? God says, stay the course. God says, stay the course. Be faithful to me. We say, okay, that's easy. That's easy. Because I love you, God. I can stay the course. I can remain faithful. Though there are those trying to tear me away, though there are those trying to put me down, I can be faithful to you, God. It's easy. It's going to take a little bit more effort right now, because the affliction that's upon me is making it difficult, but it's an easy decision to make. It's an easy decision to make, to do right. The Bible says that he that knoweth to do right and doeth it not, to him it is sin. It's an easy decision to do right. When you want to be right with God. Look up. Look up beyond your superstitions. Look up beyond your old remedies. Look beyond the professionals, the ones who tell you, oh, this is the way that it has to be. They've got everything figured out. They've got psychology figured out. They've got academics figured out. They've got an outline for every encounter that you may have in life that would cause you conflict or consternation. They say you just work through it this way. And they do what they do. They give you advice. And they may give you good advice to get through life. But no good advice can get you to heaven. It takes salvation. It takes looking to the one who became sin for us. The Bible says he has made sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. You see, when Moses made that serpent out of brass and set it on a pole, he was making an image of the very thing that was destroying the people. Moses, that's obscene that you would take that's making everybody sick and killing people and say, look to this. Moses said, it's not my decision. I'm just doing what God told me to do. I'm being faithful. Not my will, but thine be done, Moses might have said. When God told him, make an image of what's making everybody sick and pull it up there and tell them to look at it. Okay, God, doesn't make sense to me. Okay, God, I might have to face some ridicule. They've already been accusing me. But I'll do what you tell me to do. Just like Jesus in the garden. Saying, okay, God, if there be any other way, if there be any other way, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Even as Jesus had said before, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And then he said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. The people of Israel had to look at the image of the very thing that was destroying them, that caused them harm. We look at Jesus, again, who was made sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. Perhaps it was difficult for some of those Israelites to accept the fact that something so easy would result in their deliverance. That looking to the thing that was destroying them in obedience to God would result in their deliverance. But after time, it got easier. After time, it just became tradition. Oh, you remember, it's even written there in the book of the Numbers, there in the law. Generations later they could say that Moses put that serpent on the rod. And see, there's the serpent over there. We've kept it. It became tradition. And after a few more generations, it became idolatry. It no longer became something that was obscene, that the very thing that was destroying them was the thing that they must look to in the foolishness of man versus the wisdom of God would give them deliverance by that. It became tradition. And then it became idolatry when they said, yeah, that's what we worship. That's what saved us. That's what saved our people when they were afflicted in the wilderness. That image right there. And it got to the point where King Hezekiah said, destroy it. They had kept it for generations. Hundreds and hundreds of years. They had kept that brass serpent on the pole until the people began to worship it. And Hezekiah said, no, we're only going to worship God. God did something mighty and wonderful in the wilderness. And He used that. But that right there is not what delivered us. It was God. And so He destroyed that image. And there in the early church, it was perhaps something that people didn't want to consider, that a person would be crucified. It's obscene to think that that would be our deliverance. I'd even hesitate to mention it, except that I know it would be a good analogy. You could think about somebody here being lynched, and you say, my God, is that what you are going to use to deliver us from cruel injustice? God says, yes. Yes. It seems obscene to even talk about, but that's what God had said. He's going to take your place. My justice is going to be withheld from you because of the injustice held against my Son. And Jesus there in the garden saying, not my will, but thine be done. Okay, God, if that's what it's going to take, I'll go to the cross. I'll suffer that injustice. I'll suffer that cruelty. I will become sin for them. And now God tells us, look to the cross. Look to the cross. Look to the very image of your sin that is destroying you. And there in the early church, it would have been something hard to get over. Hard to get over. We got to look to that. In the early days of the church in Rome, the Christians would have to go underground into a place called catacombs, which are underground tombs and tunnels there in Rome, where they would meet in secret because they were fearing persecution. And from time to time, the authorities would know they were there and they would rush in and arrest them all. I have not been there, but I know people who have. And I've seen pictures of the places. And in various places where the Christians would meet, they would carve onto the walls of those caves and tunnels Christian symbols. They would carve crosses into the walls. They would carve the fish symbol that's seen on the back of many cars today as a Christian symbol. They would carve Christian imagery into the walls to indicate this is where we meet. This is where we have met. And then also after the soldiers would rush in and arrest them, the soldiers would defile those images. And I saw one time a picture that was taken and read the account of it, that they took one of the crosses and they carved a man with a donkey's head on the cross, making fun of what Christians believe to be so sincere, so genuine, so sacred. Saying, this is what we think of your God. That's what Christians had to deal with in the early days. But after time, it became tradition. It became easier to say, oh, I'm a Christian. Constantine came to power and it became popular to say you're a Christian. And now people say, oh, I'm a Christian, at the drop of a hat, without really knowing what it means to say something so easy. They carry a cross, or they wear a cross, not realizing how much it cost those first believers. To say, I'm a Christian is so easy. I'm a Christian. Those 4 syllables. It's so easy. But it was a difficult decision back then. And when we understand what it means, it should be no less sincere to us today to realize that it requires dying to ourselves, Remember, they looked to that image of the serpent of brass, that image of what had been destroying them, and through that God gave them deliverance. We look to Christ on the cross, the image of our own destruction through which we are delivered. Sin and death are our destruction, but Jesus Christ conquered them. And His victory gives us deliverance. Hebrews said He also Himself likewise took part in the same, what? Death. That through death He might destroy him that has the power of death, that is the devil. He took part in death because He knew that it was unjust for an innocent one to die. He knew that the death that He would take was not His own. But He became the propitiation. He became the appeasement before the Father. Though we who say, God, I am guilty of death, can look at the Son of God and say, He wasn't. And yet He died. And so I'm going to claim His death as my own. And God says, yes. Yes. Again, Hebrews said that through death He might destroy him that has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver them, us, who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Looking up requires that we look beyond our own selves, beyond what is familiar, beyond what makes sense to us. And we look to what makes sense to God. And we look to what God says is right. And God says you must die to yourself. In his book, The Cost of Discipleship, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, when God calls a man, He bids him come and die. Come and die. Why? Why do we die? Book of Romans chapter 6 says, He that is dead is free from sin. Now if we be dead with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with Him, knowing that Christ being raised from the dead dieth no more, death hath no more dominion over Him. For in that He died unto sin once, but in that He liveth unto God. Likewise reckon ye yourselves also to be dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God through Jesus Christ our Lord. We claim His death as our own. And in that we put to death that life of sin. When we come to Him. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that ye should obey the lust thereof. If we're delivered from sin and death, we no longer live in it. We no longer live in fear of it. We look up. We look above. We look beyond and we look through. And we find that hope of everlasting life in Jesus Christ. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the expectation of glorification. Hope is not just some misty wishful thinking, but it's knowing what's waiting for us as we continue in faith to God, in His service. Jesus said, I go and prepare a place for you. If it were not so, I would have told you. We know why we're serving Him. And because we know why we're serving Him, we know that even though it's so easy to say it, it takes a little bit more to actually do it. It takes dying to ourselves. It takes saying, not my will, but thine be done. When we're presented with alternatives. Moses said, by the commandment of God, look at that serpent. Look at that brass serpent that's been set up. Bob next door said, I got this ointment that'll work. It worked on me last month when I was bitten by a snake out in gathering sticks. Well, last month it wasn't the judgment of God. It was just happenstance. And it worked for you then, but this is the judgment of God, and you've got to obey God. Joe next door, or Bob next door, whatever name I used. So I'm not going to take that ointment that you've got, but I'm going to be obedient to God. And though my joints may ache like fire from the bite, from the poison that's rushing through my veins trying to kill me, God says I'll live if I look to Him. Because that effort of faith was not in the serpent, but in the God who made the promise. That effort of faith is not in 2 sticks and 3 nails, but in the God who hung there. That effort of faith is not about making our own decisions, but saying, God, I will be obedient to you. And that effort of faith means that we're not looking down at ourselves, but we're looking up to Him. And with heads bowed and eyes closed this evening in reverence to God and out of respect for those who are gathered here together in our midst, look to Jesus.